The click of the door closing on her 14-year marriage was the quietest, most violent sound Haley Shaw had ever heard. One moment she was the respected wife of real estate titan Daniel Shaw, the silent partner and design genius behind his architectural empire. The next, she was being replaced by a woman half her age with a name made for headlines and a soul made of glass. Daniel didn't just leave her, he erased her, taking credit for her life's work and flaunting his new prize crystal all over the city. He thought he had left Haley with nothing. He thought he had won, but he made one critical mistake. He forgot that true brilliance can't be extinguished, only hidden. And tonight at the city's most exclusive gala, he's about to watch the woman he discarded shine brighter than he could ever imagine in the arms of a man who owns the world Daniel only dreams of conquering. The silence in the sprawling minimalist penthouse on Park Avenue was a new kind of heavy. It wasn't the peaceful quiet Haley had once cherished after a long day of drafting blueprints. It was a hollow, echoing void where a life used to be. For 14 years, that life had been intertwined with Daniel Shaw. They were a power couple or so, the magazine said. Daniel, the charismatic deal-maker with a smile that could sell swampland in winter, and Haley, the brilliant, unassuming architect who turned his generic steel and glass ambitions into breathtaking, award-winning realities. Her signature was on every one of his landmark buildings, not on the plaques, but in the very soul of the structures. She was the one who spent sleepless nights obsessing over the way light would filter through an atrium at dawn, the precise curvature of a grand staircase, the seamless integration of green space into an urban jungle. Daniel sold the dream, but Haley built it. He got the cover of Forbes. She got a quiet satisfaction that for a time had been enough. The end came not with a bang, but with a series of cuttingly casual remarks. "We need a more youthful brand identity," he'd said one evening, scrolling through his phone, not even looking at her. "Someone with social media synergy." A week later, Crystal thinks we should leverage influencers for the Hudson Yards project. Crystal. The name sounded like cheap champagne, an effervescent burst of something fleeting and artificial. Haley had seen her first on Instagram, a 24-year-old with impossibly white teeth and a vacant stare posing on the yet-to-be-completed balcony of the Shaw Tower, their tower. Haley's masterpiece. The project she had bled for, the culmination of a decade of her design philosophy. In the photo, Crystal was wearing a ridiculously small bikini and one of Daniel's custom-tailored suit jackets, a glass of rosé in her hand. The caption read, "The King and His New Castle. So proud of my man's vision. Power couple #NYC Real Estate #Living the Dream." The divorce proceedings were a masterclass in humiliation. Daniel's legal team, led by the notoriously ruthless Martin Webb, painted Haley as a discontented housewife with expensive hobbies. They systematically dismantled her contributions, framing her architectural work as preliminary sketches and spousal support. Every blueprint she presented, every design document with her annotations, was dismissed as collaborative input, generously permitted by the true visionary Daniel Shaw. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love and trust 20 years ago was wielded like a weapon, leaving her with a fraction of the fortune she had helped build. She was forced to leave the penthouse she had designed, every line and texture a reflection of her own spirit. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village, the kind of place they might have rented as struggling newlyweds. Except now she was alone, pushing 45, with a portfolio of work that officially belonged to another man. The months that followed were a blur of gray. The society friends who had once clamored for invitations to her dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a ghost in a city that had once felt like her own. The real torture, however, was digital. Crystal's social media was a constant glittering assault. Pictures of her and Daniel on private jets at exclusive resorts, and always in front of buildings Haley had designed. Crystal would pose coquettishly by the serpentine glass wall of the Orion Center, a feature Haley had fought tooth and nail for, and caption it, "My baby is such a genius. He sees the world in curves, not corners." Each post was a fresh stab of betrayal. Daniel wasn't just moving on, He was actively rewriting history with Crystal as his vapid blonde co-author. He was stealing her past while flaunting his future. Haley deleted her social media accounts, but the stories still found her through well-meaning but pitying calls from her few remaining friends. One rainy Tuesday, her lawyer, a kind but weary woman named Susan, called with the final settlement papers. "It's done, Haley," she said, her voice laced with apology. "He's keeping the firm, the branding, the copyrights to all past projects. It's airtight." That night, Haley sat on the floor of her new, empty living room, a cardboard box of her old drafting tools beside her. She pulled out a faded photograph from years ago. It was the groundbreaking ceremony for their first major project, a boutique hotel in Soho. In the photo, she and Daniel stood side by side, both in hard hats, their faces beaming with shared pride. He had his arm around her, and he was looking at her, not the camera, with an expression of genuine awe. Where did that man go? When had the awe curdled into resentment and then into contempt? She realized now that her quiet competence hadn't supported him. It had threatened him. The more accolades her designs received, the more he felt like an imposter in his own life. Crystal was the perfect antidote. She was a mirror reflecting his own perceived greatness back at him, asking for nothing but the light he cast. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. The grief was immense, a physical weight in her chest. But as she stared at the photo, something else flickered to life within the cold ashes of her despair. It was a tiny, defiant spark. He had taken her name, her home, her history. But he couldn't take her talent. That was hers. It lived in her hands, in her mind, in the way she saw the world. And as she packed the photo away, she made a quiet vow. He would not be the final word in her story. The echo of a shattered life was deafening, but she would learn to build a new sound in its place. The first 6 months were the hardest. The name Haley Shaw was now inextricably linked to a messy public divorce. Potential clients were hesitant. To them, she was either a victim to be pitied or a scorned woman to be avoided. The name that once connoted elegance and innovative design now whispered of scandal. So she made a change. She founded a small independent firm under her maiden name, Haley Vance Design. It felt both like a retreat and a declaration of war. Her office was a cramped second-floor walk-up in Chelsea with a temperamental radiator and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was a far cry from the sweeping corner office overlooking Central Park she once occupied. Her first employee was Penelope, a sharp-witted, fiercely loyal draftswoman who had quit Shaw Corp the day Haley's departure was announced, stating she refused to work for a credit-stealing egomaniac with terrible taste in arm candy. Penelope, with her fire-engine red hair and even fierier loyalty, became Haley's one-woman support system. Their first projects were humbling. A kitchen remodel in Brooklyn for a young couple who paid them partly in homemade sourdough. A lobby redesign for a dentist's office in Queens that had a budget smaller than Daniel's weekly wine allowance. Haley poured the same meticulous detail and creative energy into these small spaces as she had into skyscrapers. She found a quiet joy in the work, a satisfaction that was wholly her own. She wasn't just designing spaces. She was rebuilding her own foundation, brick by painful brick. She learned to be lean, resourceful. She negotiated with suppliers herself, hauled material samples on the subway, and worked late into the night fueled by cheap coffee and Penelope's unwavering belief in her. "This dentist's lobby is going to be a temple of oral hygiene," Penelope would declare, taping up swatches. "People will come from miles around just to floss in a space this well designed." Slowly, word of mouth began to spread. The Brooklyn couple's kitchen was featured on a popular design blog. The dentist reported a surprising uptick in new patients who all commented on the calming, beautiful waiting room. Small commissions started to trickle in: a brownstone renovation, a small art gallery layout, a rooftop garden design. Each project was a victory, a small piece of her identity reclaimed. Meanwhile, Daniel and Crystal continued their public spectacle. Shaw Corp announced a new audacious project, Elysian, a hypermodern luxury residential tower that promised to redefine the skyline. The press releases were filled with Daniel's pompous quotes about his singular vision and disruptive approach to urban living. Crystal was named brand ambassador, and her Instagram was a fire hose of behind-the-scenes content mostly featuring her trying on hard hats over perfectly coiffed hair. Haley saw the initial renderings online. They were cold, ostentatious, and derivative. It was all flash and no substance, a desperate attempt to mimic the style she had cultivated but without any of the underlying principles. It looked like a caricature of her work stripped of its soul. For the first time, she didn't feel a pang of loss. She felt a flicker of professional disdain. He was lost without her eye, and it was beginning to show. One evening, while working late on the plans for the art gallery, Penelope slid a thick cream-colored envelope across Haley's drafting table. "This came by courier," she said, her voice neutral. The envelope was embossed with a stylized phoenix rising from flames. It was an invitation to the annual Phoenix Foundation Charity Ball, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's social calendar. It was an event she and Daniel had chaired 2 years in a row. Seeing the familiar crest felt like a ghost brushing against her skin. They must have sent it to the old address and it got forwarded. Haley murmured, her finger tracing the raised emblem. She was about to toss it into the recycling bin. "Or," Penelope said, leaning against the table, "they sent it to you. Haley Vance, the emerging designer who is getting quiet but significant buzz for her integrity and talent." Haley laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Penny, be realistic. I'm not on that list anymore. I'm a social leper. Besides, why would I want to go? To stand in a room full of people who watched my life implode and whispered about it over champagne. To see him." The thought of facing Daniel and Crystal, of seeing the pity in the eyes of her former peers, made her stomach clench. She had spent the better part of a year making herself small, invisible. The gala was the brightest, most unforgiving spotlight imaginable. Penelope picked up the invitation. "That's exactly why you should go," she said, her tone serious. "You've been hiding in the studio doing incredible work in the shadows. Haley, you're not a victim. You're a survivor. And it's time you stopped letting him define the narrative. This isn't about him. This is about you. Go there, hold your head high, and let them see that Haley Vance is not just surviving. She's building something new. Besides," she added with a sly grin, "every major developer, architect, and philanthropist in the city will be there. It's not a party, it's the best networking opportunity of the year. And you, my friend, deserve a night to wear something other than black turtlenecks and trade show lanyards." Haley looked around her small, cluttered office. The walls were covered in sketches, fabric samples, and wood finishes. It was a space born of her own resilience. It was hers. Penelope was right. Hiding was a choice, and she was tired of making it. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time it was accompanied by something else, a flicker of resolve. "Okay," Haley said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "Okay, I'll go." Penelope beamed. "Good. Now we have a more pressing matter. We need to find you a dress that says, 'My ex-husband is a footnote, not the whole story.'" The week leading up to the Phoenix Foundation Ball was a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. Haley felt like a soldier preparing for battle. The dress was her armor, the invitation her summons. Penelope, who appointed herself Chief of Operations for Operation Phoenix, was relentless. "No black," she declared, vetoing Haley's initial safe choices. "Black is for mourning. We are celebrating a resurrection." After a grueling day of shopping that left Haley emotionally drained, they found it in a small tucked-away boutique that specialized in independent designers. It was a gown of deep emerald silk that seemed to drink the light. It was deceptively simple, a classic clean-lined silhouette with a high neck, long sleeves, and a column skirt that flowed to the floor. Its only adornment was an intricate asymmetrical pleating across the bodice that resembled the folded wing of a bird. It was understated, elegant, and fiercely sophisticated. It was everything Crystal's style was not. It was, in a word, Haley. "That's the one," Penelope whispered, her eyes shining. It doesn't scream for attention. It commands it. The night of the gala, a cold autumn wind whipped through the streets of Manhattan. Haley stood before the full-length mirror in her small apartment bedroom, the silk of the dress cool against her skin. She had styled her hair in a simple, elegant chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of vintage diamond and emerald earrings her grandmother had left her. They were her something old. The dress was her something new. Her reflection was of a woman she was only just getting to know. The past year had etched new lines around her eyes, but they weren't lines of defeat. They were lines of resilience. The uncertainty that had clouded her gaze for so long was replaced by a quiet, steady determination. She looked strong. The wave of panic she had been holding at bay crested. What was she doing? This was a mistake. She could just stay home, order takeout, and pretend the invitation never arrived. Her hand trembled as she reached for her clutch. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Penelope. "Remember the brief, you are not Haley Shaw, the ex-wife. You are Haley Vance, the future. Go make them stare. And for God's sake, grab a free glass of the good champagne." A small smile touched Haley's lips. She took a deep, steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and walked out the door. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the sprawling Temple of Dender. The room was a breathtaking spectacle of power and wealth. Towering floral arrangements reached towards the ceiling, casting fragrant shadows on the ancient stone walls. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet clinking glasses and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations. Haley handed her coat to an attendant and paused at the top of the grand staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room was a sea of familiar faces, faces that had graced the society pages alongside hers and Daniel's for years. She saw them now clustered in their glittering groups, their eyes flicking over the new arrivals. She could feel their gazes, sense the whispers starting like a ripple in a pond. Is that Haley Shaw? What is she doing here? She descended the stairs, her steps measured and deliberate, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She would not falter. She would not hide. She navigated her way to the bar, ordered a glass of champagne as Penelope had instructed, and found a relatively quiet spot near one of the massive windows overlooking the illuminated obelisk. She held the cool glass, its stem a fragile anchor in a churning sea of anxiety. She felt a presence beside her. "Haley, my God, is that you?" She turned to see Beatrice Wallace, a woman whose charity committees she had once served, on her face a mask of poorly concealed shock. "Beatrice," Haley said, her voice smoother than she expected. "How lovely to see you." "Well, we all wondered where you'd gone," Beatrice said, her eyes darting around as if expecting Daniel to materialize. "You look well, very well." The subtext was clear. You look well for someone whose life was publicly dismantled. "I've been working," Haley replied simply. "I started my own design firm, Vance Design." "Oh, how quaint," Beatrice said, the word dripping with condescension. Before Haley could respond, Beatrice's eyes widened, looking over Haley's shoulder towards the entrance. "Oh, look, there they are. Don't they just make the most divine couple?" Haley didn't need to turn. A palpable shift had occurred in the room's energy. The volume of chatter dipped and then rose again, buzzing with a new frequency. A path seemed to clear through the crowd as if by magnetic force. She steeled herself and finally turned to look. Daniel Shaw had arrived, and on his arm was Crystal. They made an entrance designed to be photographed. Daniel was immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his silvering temples lending him a distinguished air that belied his predatory nature. He radiated an aura of success, his smile broad, and practiced his hand possessively on the small of Crystal's back. Crystal was a spectacle in scarlet. Her dress was a confection of sequins and tulle, strategically sheer and cut daringly low. A diamond necklace, the infamous Crystal Kiss, that had been a gossip column fixture for weeks, glittered at her throat. It was a look that screamed for attention, a stark contrast to Haley's quiet elegance. Together, they were less a couple and more a brand launch. Haley watched them, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. The man who had shared her bed and her dreams for 14 years looked like a stranger, a performer playing a role she no longer recognized. The sharp pain of betrayal had dulled over the months into a scar, and seeing him now didn't reopen the wound. It simply reminded her where it was. They worked the room like seasoned politicians, Daniel glad-handing a portly real estate developer, Crystal air-kissing a fashion blogger. Every few feet they would pause for a photographer, Crystal tilting her head just so Daniel's smile never faltering. Haley turned back to the window, hoping to remain unnoticed, to simply be a ghost in the machine. But Daniel had always had a sixth sense for her presence. It was as if he had a radar for the one person in the room who wasn't captivated by his performance. She felt his eyes on her before she saw him approaching. The small crowd around him parted, and there he was, Crystal still attached to his arm, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "Haley," he said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that once had the power to soothe her. Now it just sounded rehearsed. "I have to admit I'm surprised to see you here." "Daniel," she replied, her voice even. She gave a polite, distant nod to his companion. "Crystal." Crystal looked Haley up and down. A flicker of something, was it confusion or derision, in her eyes. Haley's simple dress was an affront to Crystal's worldview, where worth was measured in carats and couture labels. "That's a classic dress," Crystal said, the word classic sounding like an insult. "Vintage, timeless?" Haley corrected gently, taking a small sip of her champagne. She refused to be drawn into Crystal's petty game. Haley's always been a fan of the understated. Daniel chimed in, but his tone made it sound like a failing. He gestured around the magnificent hall. "Brings back memories, doesn't it? We ran this whole event 2 years ago, raised a record amount. I remember your seating charts were a work of art." It was a backhanded compliment designed to remind her of her former role, the helpful behind-the-scenes wife. "I remember," Haley said, her gaze steady. "I also remember designing the lighting scheme for the exhibit that year. It won a national award." A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw. It was a direct hit, a reminder that she was more than just a party planner. Crystal, oblivious to the undercurrent, piped up. "Greg is just so brilliant, he's a true visionary. The plans for his new building, Elysian, they're going to completely change the city. He showed me the 3D models. I get to help design the penthouse spa." She beamed as if announcing she'd solved world hunger. "I'm sure you'll bring a unique perspective," Haley said, the very picture of polite detachment. Daniel's smirk returned. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He wanted to parade his victory, to rub her nose in everything he had taken from her and everything he had gained. "Business is booming," he said, puffing out his chest slightly. "Shaw Corp is closing a deal with a consortium from Singapore next week. Billions. Elysian is fully funded before we've even broken ground. In fact," he leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "I'm about to close a preliminary deal tonight. The biggest name in tech is here, looking to acquire the top 10 floors for his new corporate headquarters. It's all happening." He was showing off not for the crowd, but for her. He wanted to see her flinch, to see a flicker of regret or envy in her eyes. He wanted to prove that leaving her was the best business decision he'd ever made. Haley simply listened, her expression unreadable. She felt the stares of those nearby, eavesdropping on the tense reunion. She was a curiosity, a piece of gossip made flesh. "That's wonderful for you, Daniel," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I wish you all the success you feel you deserve." The carefully chosen words hung in the air. It wasn't a blessing, it was a judgment. For the first time that evening, Daniel's mask of charming success slipped. A flash of anger, of frustration crossed his face. He had expected tears or bitterness or a desperate attempt to reconnect. He had not expected this cool, impenetrable dignity. It unnerved him. He was losing control of the scene, a situation he loathed. He decided to go for the kill. He pulled Crystal closer, planting a loud performative kiss on her cheek. "Well, we should get back to it. Important people to see. Crystal, darling, let's go talk to Bob from the Times. I want to make sure he gets a good shot of that necklace." He turned to leave, but paused, looking back at Haley one last time. "Try to enjoy the party," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "It's good for you to get out." As they walked away, a triumphant Crystal whispering in his ear, Daniel felt a surge of satisfaction. He had done it. He had faced his past and proven how much better his present was. He had shown her and everyone else that he was the victor. He had left her standing alone in the shadows, just a footnote in his grand story. He was sure of it. Haley watched them go, the scarlet of Crystal's dress a receding beacon of vanity. She didn't feel defeated. She felt liberated. The final chain of her old life, the one that still tugged with the phantom weight of what if, had just been severed by his crass, ego-driven performance. He hadn't broken her. He had set her free. She took another sip of champagne, the bubbles a quiet celebration on her tongue, and turned back to the serenity of the view outside. A man had approached the window beside her, his presence so unobtrusive she hadn't noticed him until he spoke. "The Temple of Dendur," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone devoid of the aggressive bravado that filled the room. "A monument saved from the rising waters of the Nile. A beautiful metaphor, don't you think, that some things of great value are worth saving from the flood?" Haley turned. The man was tall and lean, with kind, intelligent eyes and a subtle dusting of gray at his temples that spoke of experience, not age. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in any setting. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that was magnetic in the clamor of the gala. He looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. "I've always thought so," Haley replied, drawn in by his thoughtful observation. "It's a testament to ingenuity and respect for history. So many modern builders seem to forget that." "They're too busy building monuments to themselves," the man said with a wry smile. He gestured towards the main hall. "Most of this is just ego rendered in concrete and steel." He extended a hand. "Theodore Camden." The name struck Haley like a soft chime. Theodore Camden, the reclusive tech billionaire, the genius behind a dozen innovations that had reshaped the digital landscape. He was a legend, notoriously private, rarely photographed. He was the biggest name in tech Daniel had been boasting about. Haley felt a jolt, but her composure held. "Haley Vance," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "I know," he said simply. His eyes held hers, and there was no pity in them, only a deep, unnerving perception. "I've been wanting to meet you. I'm a great admirer of your work." Haley blinked. "My work. The Orion Center." He said, his gaze never wavering. "The Meridian Hotel. The initial design philosophy for the Shaw Tower before it was compromised." He said the last word with a hint of distaste. "I can see your hand in them. The harmony between form and function, the use of natural light as a building material. It's like watching a signature being written across a skyline. It's brilliant." Haley was speechless. For years she had stood in Daniel's shadow, her contributions minimized or erased entirely. To hear this man, this titan of industry, recite her accomplishments and correctly attribute them to her was more validating than any award or public accolade. "How?" she started to ask. "I make it my business to know who the real visionaries are," Theodore explained. "Not just the ones who buy the plaques. I read an architectural journal profile on you from about 10 years ago. It stuck with me. When I heard you'd started your own firm, Vance Design, I followed the news with interest." Across the room, Daniel was holding court, laughing loudly at something a city councilman said. He glanced over, expecting to see Haley still standing alone, a pathetic wallflower. Instead, he saw her engaged in conversation with a tall, distinguished stranger. A frown creased his brow. "Who is that?" The string quartet transitioned into a slow, elegant waltz. Theodore smiled at Haley. "I'm not much for these events. The networking is a necessary evil. But a dance, A dance is a different kind of conversation. Haley Vance, would you do me the honor? A genuine, unforced smile bloomed on Haley's face. It felt like the first real smile in over a year. I would be delighted, Mr. Camden. Theodore, please. He led her to the center of the floor. As he took her hand and placed his other gently on her waist, a current of warmth and surprise went through her. It had been so long since she had been held with such simple, respectful grace. As they began to dance, moving with an easy, fluid rhythm, the room began to take notice. The whispers started again, but this time they were of a different nature. Who is she dancing with? Wait, is that Theodore Camden? I thought he never came to these things. Camden dancing with Shaw's ex-wife. The news rippled through the gala like a shockwave. Daniel, in the middle of a self-aggrandizing story, heard the name Camden and froze. He turned his champagne glass halfway to his lips. He saw Haley, a vision in emerald, gliding across the dance floor in the arms of the one man he had been desperate to impress all night. The man whose 10-floor deal was meant to be the final jewel in his crown of victory over her. The expression on Daniel's face was a stunning rapid-fire sequence of confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally raw, unadulterated fury. His triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. Crystal, sensing his attention shift, followed his gaze. "Who's she with?" she asked, her voice shrill with indignation. "That," Daniel ground out, his knuckles white around his glass, "is my deal." On the dance floor, Haley was oblivious to the drama she was causing. She was captivated by her conversation with Theodore. "I'm looking for a lead architect for my new foundation headquarters," Theodore was saying, his voice low and for her ears only. "A campus dedicated to sustainable technology and education. It needs to be more than a building. It needs to be a statement of purpose. It needs a soul, your kind of soul." Haley's heart soared. This wasn't just a compliment. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. A project that would not only put her back on the map, but would allow her to create something meaningful, something entirely her own. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed. "Say you'll have lunch with me next week to discuss it," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The music swelled to a close. Theodore held her hand for a moment longer than necessary. "The flood recedes, Ms. Vance," he said softly. "The best structures remain." He escorted her off the dance floor just as Daniel, his face a thundercloud of rage, began to storm towards them, leaving a confused and irritated Crystal in his wake. Daniel saw his perfect evening, his perfect narrative, crumbling into dust. The woman he had cast aside as a relic was now the center of attention, not as a victim, but as a prize sought after by a man whose power and influence dwarfed his own. The regret that hit him was sudden and suffocating. But it wasn't for the loss of Haley the woman. It was for the loss of an asset he had catastrophically undervalued. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had discarded his greatest secret weapon, and she had just been deployed against him on the grandest stage imaginable. The collision was inevitable. Daniel reached them just as Theodore was bidding Haley a polite good evening, promising his assistant would be in touch. "Camden," Daniel boomed, forcing a jovial tone that was painfully transparent. He clapped a hand on Theodore's shoulder, a gesture of faux camaraderie. "Daniel Shaw. We haven't been formally introduced. I was hoping to catch you tonight." Theodore Camden subtly shifted, dislodging Daniel's hand. He regarded Daniel with a cool, appraising look that could freeze fire. "Mr. Shaw, I know who you are." There was no warmth in the acknowledgement. "Great, great." Daniel pressed on, sweat beading on his brow. He gestured vaguely between Haley and Theodore. "I see you've met my ex-wife, Haley. She was quite the decorator in her day." The words were meant to diminish her, to relegate her back to the role of a hobbyist in Theodore's eyes. Theodore's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Ms. Vance is not a decorator, Mr. Shaw. She is an architect of rare talent. I've been following her career, her real career, for years." The public correction delivered in Theodore's quiet but authoritative voice was a slap in the face. A few people nearby who had been watching the drama unfold exchanged glances. Daniel's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He tried to recover, turning his attention back to the deal. Well, that's history. The future is what's exciting, Elysian. I believe my office sent over the portfolio for the corporate leasing opportunity. 10 floors of the most advanced commercial real estate on the planet. I saw it, Theodore said flatly. And I'll be candid with you, Mr. Shaw. The design is uninspired. It's a gaudy monument to ego with poor environmental integration and a stunning lack of humanity. It's precisely the kind of empty spectacle I'm not interested in. He then turned his full, charming attention back to Haley. Ms. Vance, it was a true pleasure. I look forward to our lunch. With a final polite nod to Haley and a complete dismissal of Daniel, Theodore Camden turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd as quietly as he had appeared. The silence he left behind was deafening. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. He had been publicly, surgically, and utterly humiliated. Not only had he lost the deal of a lifetime, but he had lost it to the woman he'd just belittled, who had apparently earned the billionaire's respect on her own merit. Crystal finally caught up her scarlet dress, looking cheap and garish under the suddenly harsh lights. What happened? What did he say? She demanded, tugging on his arm. Daniel shook her off, his eyes wild with fury fixed on Haley. You, he seethed, his voice a venomous whisper. You did this. You planned this. You set me up. Haley looked at him, at the paranoid, desperate man he had become, and felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. Daniel, the world doesn't revolve around you, she said, her voice weary. Some things happen because of merit, not malice. Now, if you'll excuse me, this evening has been far more interesting than I anticipated, but I believe it's over. She turned and walked away, not with a triumphant flourish, but with the simple, quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The society pages the next day weren't about Daniel and Crystal's grand entrance. They were dominated by a single grainy photo of Theodore Camden dancing with a mysterious, elegant woman in emerald. The columns buzzed with speculation. Who was Haley Vance? What was her connection to the reclusive billionaire? In an instant, Haley was transformed from a pitiable divorcee into an intriguing and powerful figure. The story of Theodore's public dressing down of Daniel Shaw spread like wildfire through the city's financial and real estate circles. Confidence in Daniel, which was largely built on bluster and perceived momentum, began to erode. The Singaporean consortium, already having quiet doubts about the Elysian project's soaring budget and soulless design, heard the story. A man who couldn't recognize the talent in his own house for 14 years was perhaps not the visionary they should be betting billions on. A week later, they quietly pulled their funding, citing market uncertainties. Daniel's empire began to crack. Subcontractors got nervous about being paid. His lines of credit tightened. He was a shark that had to keep moving forward, and he had just been stopped dead in the water. His relationship with Crystal, a union built on the unstable foundation of success and publicity, began to crumble under the pressure. The lavish gifts slowed. The fawning press disappeared, replaced by articles questioning the viability of the Elysian project. Crystal's brand was tied to his success, and his success was evaporating. The arguments became frequent and vicious. "This is your fault," she shrieked at him one night in the now cavernous penthouse, waving her phone, which showed a new article about Haley Vance's design being courted for a major project. "You made me look like an idiot. You told me she was a nobody. Now she's the one everyone is talking about, and I'm stuck here with you and your failing building." The regret that consumed Daniel was a bitter, acidic thing. He saw it all so clearly now. Haley had been his partner, his compass, his source of true creative power. He had thrown it all away for a cheap thrill, for a vapid ego boost. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had amputated the best part of himself. He would call her late at night, his voice thick with whiskey and desperation. "Haley, we can fix this," he'd slur into her voicemail. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. It was always you. We were a team. I need you." Haley would listen to the messages in the quiet of her apartment, not with anger, but with a sad finality. He didn't miss her. He missed what she did for him. He missed her talent, her stability, her quiet strength that made his loud weaknesses seem less glaring. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a ghostwriter for his life, and he was finally realizing he couldn't write a single compelling sentence on his own. She never called back. She was too busy drafting the future. A year can change a skyline. More than that, a year can change a life. The autumn air, crisp and smelling of distant rain, was sharp on Haley's face as she stood on the exposed 20th floor of what was becoming the Camden Foundation for Sustainable Futures. The roar of the city below was a distant rhythmic pulse, a backdrop to the more immediate symphony of her new world, the percussive clang of steel on steel, the whine of a power saw, the coordinated shouts of the construction crew. This was a sound she had once loved, then lost, and now reclaimed as her own. She wore a white hard hat, her name Vance, stenciled neatly on the side, and a thick, practical jacket over her clothes. A roll of blueprints was tucked securely under her arm. "The glazing for the west atrium is arriving an hour ahead of schedule." Ms. Vance called out Frank, the burly site foreman, his voice a gravelly, respectful rumble. He jogged over holding a tablet displaying a logistics chart. "The crane's free. Want us to start hoisting or stick to the original timeline?" Haley unrolled a section of her blueprint on a nearby stack of plywood, her gloved finger tracing a complex series of lines. "Let's start now, Frank. The weather report shows high winds moving in after 3. I want that curtain wall secure before then. Make sure the gaskets are double-checked. The temperature differential on that side will be significant." "You got it," he said with a nod of absolute confidence. He'd been skeptical of her at first, another starchitect with fancy ideas. But after a month of her practical on-the-ground problem-solving and an encyclopedic knowledge of load-bearing capacities, he'd become her most vocal champion. She didn't just design, she knew how to build. She watched him go, a deep, quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. This was where she belonged. Not in a ballroom, not at a charity luncheon, but here amidst the dust and the noise, turning vision into reality. Further downtown, another very different structure scarred the skyline. The Elysian project, Daniel Shaw's would-be monument to himself, stood as a skeletal ruin. Its steel beams, already showing the first faint blush of rust, were a stark monument to his hubris, wrapped in tattered plastic sheeting that snapped and billowed in the wind like tormented ghosts. The project was a carcass picked clean by lawyers and creditors. Daniel's name, once a seal of success, was now a punchline in the industry. And Crystal, whose entire identity had been a reflection of his success, had vanished at the first sign of a shadow, her social media presence pivoting seamlessly to a crypto millionaire in Miami, all traces of her life with Daniel scrubbed clean. A familiar voice cut through the noise of the site. Thinking about the competition, Haley turned, a genuine smile spreading across her face. Theodore Camden stood there holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, looking perfectly at ease in his tailored wool coat amidst the raw construction. He navigated the rebar and cables with the same confidence he navigated a boardroom. Hardly, Haley replied, accepting a cup. The warmth seeped into her cold hands. "I was thinking about thermal expansion joints." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that always seemed to warm her. "Of course you were." He stood beside her, looking out at the sprawling city. "Frank tells me you're already a legend with the crew. Says he'd follow you into any architectural battle." "Frank just appreciates that I know the difference between a truss and a trestle," she said with a shrug, but she was pleased. Their relationship had grown organically from the seed of mutual respect planted that night at the gala. It was a partnership of equals, a quiet and powerful love built not on grand gestures, but on shared passions and late-night conversations about everything from urban planning to ancient philosophy. He celebrated her triumphs as if they were his own, and listened to her frustrations with an insightful patience she'd never known. He loved her for the intricate, brilliant workings of her mind, not for the reflection she cast upon him. "It's going to be magnificent," he said, his gaze sweeping over the rising structure, then coming to rest on her face. "We still have a long way to go," she murmured, her eyes following the arc of a crane as it began to lift a massive panel of glass into the sky. "All the best things do," he replied, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together in a gesture of simple, profound intimacy. Later that day, Haley was at the new offices of Vance Design. The cramped walk-up was a distant memory. Her firm now occupied 2 floors of a beautifully restored building in Soho, the space itself a testament to her design philosophy, all clean lines, natural materials, and abundant light. The main studio was a hive of creative energy. 15 architects and designers, a mix of seasoned veterans and bright young talents, were bent over drafting tables and computer monitors. Penelope, now Chief Operating Officer, orchestrated the chaos with her trademark fiery efficiency. Haley moved through the space a leader in her element. She paused to help a junior designer resolve a tricky sightline issue, made a quick decision on a stone sample for a new gallery project, and approved a set of final drawings for a client. She was no longer a ghost. She was a gravitational center pulling together talent and opportunity, building a legacy that was entirely her own. Driving home as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the avenues, her car was stopped in traffic. On the seat beside her lay the preliminary sketches for a new performing arts center, a project she had just won against 3 of the biggest firms in the country. She was idly looking out the window when she saw him. Daniel. He was walking down the sidewalk, hunched against the wind. The impeccably tailored suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, ill-fitting overcoat that looked a size too big for his diminished frame. His confident, world-conquering stride had been ground down into a defeated shuffle. His hair was unkempt, his face pallid. He was just another anonymous man in a sea of anonymous faces, a king dethroned, wandering the streets of a kingdom that no longer recognized him. For a moment he was just that, a stranger. Then he looked up, and his gaze swept across the line of cars, and his eyes dull and empty, a second before locked with hers. The world seemed to fall silent. In that single frozen moment she saw it all in his face. The shock of recognition. The shame, the crushing weight of 1,000 squandered yesterdays. She saw the ghost of the man she had once loved, and the pathetic shell of the man who had torn her life apart. The desperate, bottomless regret in his eyes was a chasm. A year ago, seeing him like this might have sparked a flare of triumph, a bitter taste of victory. But now Haley felt nothing of the sort. There was no anger, no satisfaction. There was only a profound, quiet sense of finality. He was no longer a villain in her story. He was just a postscript. He had no more power over her. The rage and the grief he had caused had been transformed, recycled into the steel and mortar of her new life. He took a half-step toward the street as if he might call out to her, a drowning man reaching for the ship that had long since sailed. Haley held his gaze. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness nor of pity. It was one of closure, an acknowledgement of a past that was truly irrevocably past. A final silent goodbye. The light changed. The car horn behind her beeped once softly. She took her foot off the brake and the car moved forward, accelerating smoothly into the flow of traffic. In her rearview mirror she saw his image shrink, becoming smaller and smaller, until he was just an indistinct shape absorbed back into the crowd. She didn't look again. She was Haley Vance. She was not the ex-wife, the victim, or the footnote. She was the architect, and as she drove towards the rising sun of her own future, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she was finally gloriously designing a life entirely of her own. The blueprints were hers. The foundation was strong, and the view from the top was more beautiful than she had ever dared to imagine. Haley's story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about a woman who was told her worth was tied to a man only to discover that her true value was in her own hands, her own mind, and her own unbreakable spirit. She didn't need a billionaire to save her, but his respect helped her remember how to save herself. She walked through the fire of a devastating betrayal and didn't just survive. She used the ashes to build an empire of her own design. Her victory wasn't just in winning, it was in realizing she was never playing his game to begin with. If Haley's journey from the ashes of a painful past to the blueprint of a brilliant future inspired you, please let us know. These are the stories we love to share. Tales of resilience, empowerment, and the quiet triumph of substance over spectacle. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will move and inspire you. Thank you for listening.
He thought the greatest day of his life was the day she left. He saw her a year later, a ghost from his past, dressed in what he called pathetic simple clothes. He laughed standing beside his glamorous fiancée, a woman draped in a one-of-a-kind designer gown that screamed wealth and success. But what he didn't know, what the whole world was about to find out, was that the woman he was mocking, his insignificant ex-wife Evelyn, hadn't just admired that dress. She had sketched it, stitched it, and created it. This is the story of how a man's cruel mockery became the spotlight for his own public humiliation. The air in the Corinthian ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Foundation, a night where New York's elite gathered to outbid, outdress, and outshine one another under the guise of philanthropy. Arthur Penhaligon navigated the glittering crowd with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was born to be in such rooms. On his arm, a perfect accessory to his tailored Tom Ford suit, was Bethany Cole, his fiancée. Her laughter was like the chime of tiny expensive bells, and her presence turned heads, mostly because of the dress. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light of the chandeliers. It fell in a column, simple in its silhouette, but breathtakingly complex in its construction. A cascade of hand-stitched, gunmetal grey beadwork traced the line of her collarbone and wrapped around one shoulder, resembling a delicate frozen branch of a winter tree. It was elegant, exclusive, and whispered a price tag that would make most people gasp. Arthur was preening. Every admiring glance at Bethany was a victory for him. It was validation. He had traded up. He had won. And then he saw her. Across the room, near a less populated bar, stood Evelyn Reed, his ex-wife. It took him a moment to be sure. She looked different, smaller somehow. She was dressed in a simple charcoal grey sheath dress made of a soft matty fabric. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell just below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a neat low ponytail, and her face was almost bare of makeup. Beside the shimmering peacocking crowd, she looked like a sparrow in a flock of birds of paradise. A nasty, triumphant smile curled Arthur's lip. "Well, well," he murmured to Bethany, his voice a low thrum of condescension. "Look what the cat dragged in." Bethany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted brows furrowing slightly. "Who is that, Evelyn?" "My ex-Arthur," said the word ex, laced with a satisfaction that was almost palpable. "Can you believe it? I haven't seen her since the divorce. Looks like life hasn't been too kind." He decided to approach her. It was a power move, a public demonstration of his new improved life. Bethany, sensing the drama, clung to his arm, a silent co-conspirator. Evelyn was speaking to the bartender when Arthur's shadow fell over her. "Evelyn," he said, his voice offensively smooth. She turned, and her eyes, a calm, clear grey, met his. There was a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly masked by a polite, neutral expression. "Arthur," she acknowledged, her voice even. She glanced at the woman on his arm. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Bethany Cole," Arthur announced, practically puffing out his chest. "Bethany, this is Evelyn Reed." A pleasure, Bethany said, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive scan of Evelyn's simple attire. The judgment was clear. You too? Evelyn replied, her gaze briefly falling on the midnight blue dress. A strange, unreadable emotion passed through her eyes before she met Bethany's gaze again. That's a stunning gown. Bethany brightened instantly. Oh, thank you. It's a custom piece from a new designer, Aura. Have you heard of them? Probably not. They're incredibly exclusive. It took my father's connections just to get a consultation. Arthur chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. I don't think Aura is on Evelyn's radar, darling. She always did favor minimalism. He gestured vaguely at her charcoal dress. Still keeping it simple, I see. Very practical. The insult was designed to sting, to remind her of every time he had criticized her for not being flashy enough, for preferring quality and comfort over loud brand names. During their marriage, he had constantly tried to mold her into a society wife. Buying her clothes, she hated pushing her into circles where she felt like an imposter. Her refusal, her quiet insistence on being herself, had been a major point of contention. Evelyn's composure didn't crack. She simply offered a small, tight smile. Practicality has its merits, Arthur. It lasts. So do investments. Arthur shot back pointedly, adjusting the cufflink that peeked from his sleeve. And I've always believed in investing in the best. Bethany looks like a queen, don't you think? She looks beautiful. Evelyn agreed, her voice still unnervingly calm. The lack of a wounded reaction was starting to irritate Arthur. He wanted to see a flash of envy, a hint of regret. He saw nothing. It was like talking to a placid lake. Well, we should be getting back to our table, he said, his tone dismissive. It was interesting seeing you, Evelyn. Try to enjoy the canapes. With a final triumphant smirk, he steered Bethany away, leaving Evelyn standing alone at the bar. My God, she was dreary, Bethany whispered once they were out of earshot. That dress looked like something my grandmother would wear to a funeral. You were married to that, a youthful mistake, Arthur said, waving a hand as if to erase the memory. She had no ambition, no understanding of how the world works. It's all about presentation, darling. Always has been. The life I have with you, he squeezed her arm, this is the life I was meant for. He glanced back across the ballroom. Evelyn was no longer at the bar. She had vanished back into the sea of anonymous faces, a plain grey stone swallowed by a glittering tide. He felt a surge of pride. He had shown her exactly what she had lost. He had stood before her, a titan of success, with a goddess on his arm, while she looked like a forgotten relic. He was completely, blissfully, and catastrophically unaware that the foundation of his entire triumphant moment, the very dress that symbolized his victory, was an intricate lie that was about to unravel his entire world. The Corinthian ballroom's opulence felt a world away from the quiet, ordered sanctuary of Evelyn's studio. Located on the third floor of a pre-war building in a district known more for its artisan bakeries than its high-fashion boutiques, the space was her haven. It was one large room with soaring ceilings and massive paned windows that flooded the space with the soft grey light of the city. One wall was covered in corkboard, a chaotic but meticulous collage of fabric swatches, charcoal sketches, and anatomical drawings of the human form in motion. Mannequins stood like silent sentinels, some bare others draped in muslin prototypes. Bolts of exquisite fabric, cashmere silk, charmeuse, and heavy wool crepe were stacked neatly on industrial shelving. The only sound was the gentle hum of her professional-grade sewing machine and the quiet scratch of a pencil against thick paper. Evelyn sat at her large drafting table, her back straight, the charcoal dress she'd worn to the gala still on. She wasn't designing, she was simply holding a pencil, staring at a blank sheet. The encounter with Arthur hadn't broken her, but it had left a deep, familiar ache. His words echoed in her mind, still keeping it simple, very practical. He had always used the word simple like a weapon, equating it with unambitious and lacking. He couldn't comprehend that for Evelyn, simplicity was the ultimate sophistication. It was about stripping away the non-essential to reveal the perfect line, the flawless cut, the soul of the garment. It was a philosophy she had poured into her work, into her life, and into the very brand she was building. A key turned in the lock and the door opened to reveal Finn O'Connell, her business partner and fiercely loyal friend. He was a whirlwind of creative energy, with a shock of red hair that refused to be tamed, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. He took one look at her rigid posture and the untouched sketchbook and knew. So he said, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table, "You saw him." Evelyn finally looked up, her grey eyes clouded. And his fiancée, Bethany Cole. Ah, the coal heiress. Of coal, mining and minerals. Of course, Finn said, his tone dripping with disdain. He leaned against the table. Let me guess, he was a complete ass. A small, wry smile touched Evelyn's lips. He hasn't changed. He mocked my dress. Finn glanced at her charcoal sheath. The Clara, one of our best sellers from the ready-to-wear line. The one that sold out in 3 days on Net-a-Porter. That dress, the very same, Evelyn confirmed. He called it practical. Finn snorted. The man wouldn't know good design if it bit him on his perfectly tailored backside. What about the fiancée? What was she wearing? This was the question Evelyn had been dreading and anticipating. She took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth a small comfort. She was wearing the Celeste. Finn froze his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He stared at her. The Celeste Wambig gown was not part of their ready-to-wear collection. It was a couture piece, a one-of-a-kind commission. It was the dress with the midnight silk and the hand-beaded gunmetal branch. It was to date the most ambitious, expensive and difficult piece their small atelier had ever produced. No, Finn whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. You're kidding me. She was wearing the dress. The very same, Evelyn repeated, a hint of the night's strange irony finally bubbling to the surface. She was very proud of it. Told me it was by an exclusive new designer called Aura. Finn threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, joyous sound that filled the quiet studio, chasing away the lingering ghosts of the ballroom. Oh, that is rich. That is poetic justice of the highest order. The man who mocked your clothes is paying a fortune to drape his new toy in them. He has no idea, does he? None whatsoever. Evelyn said, the tightness in her chest finally beginning to loosen. Aura was her creation, born from the ashes of her marriage. When she and Arthur divorced, she had taken her settlement, a sum he'd considered a paltry but fair price to be rid of her, and poured every cent into this studio. She had made a conscious decision to separate her name, Evelyn Reed, from her work. Her name was tainted by its association with him, by the society pages that had painted her as his dowdy, uninteresting wife. She wanted her designs to stand on their own, and so Aura was born. It was anonymous, mysterious. There was no face to the brand, only a philosophy, understated, luxury, impeccable craftsmanship, and timeless design. Finn handled the business and marketing masterfully, building a cult following based on whispers and exclusivity. They started with a small, ready-to-wear collection, sold through a few high-end online retailers. The pieces, like the Clara dress Evelyn wore, were praised for their quality and cut. The couture line was a new, more ambitious venture. They took on only a handful of commissions, vetted through a discreet agent. The client never met the designer. All communication went through the agent, ensuring Evelyn's anonymity. The Celeste gown for Bethany Cole had been their biggest commission yet. Evelyn had spent over 200 hours on the beadwork alone, her fingers raw, her eyes strained, pouring her pain, her resilience, and her artistry into every tiny stitch. The dress was a piece of her soul. And you didn't say a word? Finn asked, his eyes dancing. Oh, to have been a fly on that wall. You just stood there and let him mock the Clara while his fiancée was wearing your masterpiece. What was I to say? Evelyn asked, her voice quiet. Arthur, you colossal fool. You just paid a down payment on a condominium for the dress your fiancé is wearing. And it was made by me, the woman you called worthless. Yes, that's exactly what you should have said, Finn exclaimed. I would have paid to see his face. No, Evelyn said, shaking her head. That's his game. Public scenes, grand gestures, humiliation. My success has nothing to do with him. Aura's success is about the work. It has to remain that way. Finn's expression softened. He understood. This wasn't about revenge for Evelyn, not in the way Arthur would understand it. This was about reclamation. It was about proving to herself that the part of her Arthur had tried to extinguish her creativity, her quiet strength, was actually her greatest asset. Okay, boss, he said gently, but you have to admit there's a certain delicious irony to it all. The irony is not lost on me, she admitted, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She looked around her studio at the tools of her trade, the evidence of her hard work. This was her world, not the Corinthian ballroom, not Arthur Penhaligon's sphere of influence. She had spent years feeling small in his shadow. That night, for the first time, she realized she wasn't in his shadow at all. She was in her own light, a light so bright he couldn't even see it. He just saw a simple grey dress, while unknowingly basking in the glow of her true brilliant work. The game had changed, and Arthur didn't even know he was a player. In the weeks following the fundraiser, the name Aura became something of a mantra in the Penhaligon Cole household, or rather in the sleek, minimalist penthouse apartment Arthur had purchased in anticipation of his new life with Bethany. Bethany was obsessed. They say she's a total recluse, she said one evening, scrolling feverishly through a fashion blog on her tablet. She was lounging on a vast white sofa that had cost more than Evelyn's first car. The designer. No one has ever seen her. Some people think Aura is a collective of European artisans. Others say it's the secret side project of a famous, established designer who wants to be more experimental. Arthur grunted from behind his laptop. He was reviewing market analytics. His brow furrowed in concentration. A major energy stock he'd bet heavily on had taken a sudden sharp downturn, and it was making him nervous. As long as they keep making dresses that make you look good. Who cares, he said, not looking up. I care, Bethany retorted, tossing the tablet onto the cushion beside her. It's about more than the dress, Arthur. It's about the story, the mystery. Genevieve Dubois just mentioned them in her latest column. She called Aura the most exciting new voice in couture. The name Genevieve Dubois made Arthur pause. Dubois was the editor-in-chief of Elan, the undisputed Bible of the fashion world. Her word could make or break a brand overnight. If she was praising Aura, then Bethany's dress wasn't just a dress. It was a cultural artifact. Good, he said, trying to sound pleased. That means your investment paid off. I want another one, Bethany declared. Arthur finally looked up from his screen. Another one, Bethany. That dress cost a fortune. And it was worth every penny. I want Aura to design my wedding dress. Arthur's jaw tightened. The wedding was 6 months away, a lavish affair at her family's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. It was more than a wedding. It was a merger. The union of Penhaligon ambition and Cole old money. He was counting on the financial stability this marriage would bring him, especially now with his portfolio looking increasingly volatile. He needed to keep Bethany happy, but a custom Aura wedding gown, the cost would be astronomical. Darling, that's a wonderful idea, he said, forcing a smile. But you said yourself how hard it was to get the first one. Are you sure they even do wedding gowns? I've already had my father's assistant reach out to the agent. Bethany said, her tone triumphant. They're considering it. They want a design proposal and a full creative brief. They're playing hard to get, which only makes me want it more. Arthur felt a prickle of annoyance. He was a man who moved markets, who commanded respect. The idea of having to court some mysterious, faceless designer for the privilege of giving them an obscene amount of money was galling. It flew in the face of his entire worldview, where money and status were the keys that opened every door. It's just a dress, Bethany, he said, his patience wearing thin. No, it's the dress, she shot back, her voice rising. Don't you get it? This is our wedding. Genevieve Dubois will be there. Everyone will be there. I want to be wearing aura. It says that we're on the inside, that we're ahead of the curve. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He saw the logic in her argument. The wedding was a performance, and they needed the right costumes. An aura gown would be a statement. It would cement their status as the city's new power couple. It was an investment in their brand. All right, he conceded. All right, see what their agent says. He returned to his laptop, but his concentration was broken. He thought back to the night of the gala, to Evelyn in her drab little dress. The contrast between her and Bethany had been so satisfying. Evelyn represented his past, quiet, unassuming, and in his mind utterly devoid of the hunger required to succeed. Bethany was his future, bright, bold, and draped in the very definition of success. Yet there was a nagging dissonance. Evelyn's calmness at the gala had been unsettling. She should have been devastated. She should have looked up at him with longing and regret. Instead, she had looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. It was absurd. What could she possibly have to pity him for? His phone buzzed. It was a market alert. The energy stock had dropped another 4%. A knot of cold dread tightened in his stomach. He was more exposed on this position than he'd let on to anyone, even Bethany. He had leveraged other assets to increase his stake, sure of a quick and massive return. It had been a gamble, a move to secure the kind of wealth that would finally place him beyond the reach of the old money snobbery of families like the Coles. Now that gamble was threatening to blow up in his face. He looked over at Bethany, who was once again lost in her tablet, happily pinning ideas for her aura-designed wedding. Her family's fortune was the safety net he was counting on. The wedding couldn't just happen. It had to be perfect. Her happiness was paramount. Suddenly, the aura dress wasn't just a frivolous expense anymore. It was a critical component of the plan. It was the price of keeping the dream alive. Find out what they need, he said, his voice harder than before. Whatever the cost, whatever they want, get it done. Bethany looked up, a radiant smile on her face. I knew you'd understand. He didn't understand. Not really. He didn't understand the obsession, the mystery, or the power this invisible designer held. He just understood that in his world, which was beginning to show faint but terrifying cracks, appearances were everything. And the appearance of success, symbolized by a dress from a designer named Aura, was something he desperately needed to maintain. The name Aura began to spread through the elite circles of New York like a secret language. It was a whisper at cocktail parties, a name drop in the front rows of Fashion Week, a tag on the most exclusive social media accounts. The mystery surrounding the designer only fueled the brand's meteoric rise. Aura wasn't just fashion, it was a phenomenon. Finn was a master at stoking the flames. He orchestrated a series of calculated leaks and placements. A renowned actress was photographed at LAX wearing an Aura cashmere travel set, looking effortlessly chic. A French heiress was spotted in St. Bart's in a deceptively simple Aura linen sundress. Each piece was instantly recognizable by its cut and quality, yet devoid of any logo. The lack of branding became the brand. Then came the feature in Elan. Genevieve Dubois dedicated a full 2 pages to Aura, not with flashy photographs, but with elegant prose and artistic sketches of the designs. The article, titled "The Architecture of Silence," was a love letter to the brand's philosophy. In an age of deafening logos and celebrity-driven spectacle, Dubois wrote, "Aura is a radical act of quiet confidence." The anonymous designer, rumored to be a single, fiercely private artisan, is not selling a name but a feeling. The garments are an intimate conversation between fabric and form. To wear Aura is not to scream, "Look at me," but to command attention with the sheer force of impeccable construction and understated grace. This is not fashion for the masses. It is armor for the discerning a secret shared among those who understand that true luxury doesn't need to shout. Evelyn kept a copy of the magazine open on her desk. She had read the article a dozen times, each time feeling a thrill that was entirely her own. Armor for the discerning. Dubois understood. She understood what Evelyn was trying to do. The success was both exhilarating and terrifying. The demand was exploding. Finn was fielding calls from major department stores, from stylists, from investors, wanting to buy a piece of the mystery. "We're at a crossroads," Finn said, one afternoon, pacing the studio floor. "We can't stay a two-person operation forever. The ready-to-wear line needs to scale up or we'll be crushed by the demand. And the couture requests are insane. The crown princess of a minor European nation wants a gown for the royal wedding." Evelyn felt a wave of vertigo. A princess. It was all happening so fast. "We're not ready for that kind of expansion, Finn. The quality is everything. If we scale up too quickly, we lose what makes Aura special." "I know," he said, stopping to look at her. "Which is why we need to be strategic. I've found a small family-owned atelier in Italy that can handle a larger production run of the ready-to-wear line. The quality is superb. It would free you up to focus purely on the couture and the core design." It was a sensible solution, but Evelyn hesitated. It meant letting go, trusting others with her vision. It was another step out of the shadows and into a much larger world. Meanwhile, Arthur Penhaligon was also reading Genevieve Dubois' article. He'd found it on Bethany's nightstand. He read the words, "Quiet confidence, understated. Grace doesn't need to shout," and felt a strange sense of cognitive dissonance. They were concepts he associated with weakness, with his ex-wife. How could they possibly be the description of the world's most coveted luxury brand? It didn't compute. To him, luxury was a megaphone. It was a Bugatti, a Patek Philippe, a front row seat. It was loud, but the world, at least this influential corner of it, was telling him he was wrong. "Did you see Bethany?" asked, coming into the room, wrapped in a silk robe. "She called us the discerning." She had completely co-opted the brand's identity as her own. In her mind, by wearing Aura, she was Aura. "I saw," Arthur said, closing the magazine. "Their agent has been in touch, by the way." Bethany squealed with delight. "And what did they say about the wedding dress?" Arthur felt a familiar pang of annoyance at having to report the news. "They're particular. They've agreed to consider the commission. But they have terms." "Terms? What terms?" "First, a non-refundable design deposit of $50,000, just to create the initial sketches." Bethany didn't even blink. To her, it was a rounding error. To Arthur, whose finances were becoming more precarious by the day, it was a gut punch. "Second," he continued, his voice tight, "the designer Aura insists on a private meeting with the bride, alone, to understand her essence before beginning the design process." "A meeting?" Bethany gasped. "A real meeting?" "With Aura." "Oh my God, Arthur. No one gets to meet Aura." "I'll be the first. What will I wear? What will I say?" She was already spiraling into a vortex of excited preparation. Arthur, however, was stuck on the absurdity of the situation. This phantom designer was now dictating terms to him, summoning his fiancée, like a queen summoning a courtier. "The meeting is to be held at the designer's private atelier," he added, reading from the agent's email on his phone. "No photographs, no companions, and the location will only be disclosed 24 hours in advance. A non-disclosure agreement is required." "It's all so mysterious, so chic." Bethany swooned. "This is perfect. Absolutely perfect." Arthur watched her, a cold feeling creeping up his spine. The world was changing, and the rules he had always played by seemed to be shifting under his feet. Power, he was discovering, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it was a mysterious, unseen woman who could command a $50,000 deposit for a sketch and summon the city's most sought-after heiress to a secret meeting. He hated it. He hated the feeling of not being in control. But he was trapped. He needed the Cole family money, and the price of that was Bethany's happiness, and the price of her happiness was now inextricably linked to this ghost named Aura. Unbeknownst to him, in a quiet studio across town, the ghost was preparing for the meeting. Evelyn stood before a mannequin draped in ivory silk. She was sketching not a wedding dress, but a plan for a conversation. She felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't nervous about meeting the woman who had replaced her. She was curious. This wasn't about revenge. It was about research. Bethany Cole was the embodiment of the world Arthur had wanted Evelyn to be a part of. To design the ultimate dress for her, Evelyn needed to understand that world, not as an outsider, but from the inside. She needed to understand the woman Arthur had chosen. She needed to understand what he valued. And in doing so, perhaps she could finally fully understand why he had never valued her. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in a shroud of secrecy that Bethany found thrilling and Arthur found deeply irritating. A black car dispatched by the Aura agent arrived at their penthouse precisely at 2 o'clock. Bethany, having spent the entire morning agonizing over her outfit, finally settled on a Dior pantsuit, powerful but respectful, and emerged looking like she was about to negotiate a corporate merger. "I can't believe you're not allowed to come," she said to Arthur, for the 10th time adjusting the collar of her jacket. "Just remember what we talked about," Arthur said, his tone that of a coach sending a player into the big game. "Be charming, emphasize the prestige of the wedding, the guest list. Make sure this Aura person understands that this isn't just any commission, it's a career-making opportunity." Bethany rolled her eyes. "I think Aura is already doing just fine, Arthur. Try not to worry. I'll be back in a few hours, hopefully, with a wedding dress in the works." She kissed him on the cheek and swept out of the apartment. Arthur watched from the window as the black car pulled away, a small, dark vessel disappearing into the city's vast circulatory system. He felt completely powerless, a feeling he utterly despised. He paced the length of his living room, the polished floor reflecting his agitated form. To distract himself, he decided to do what he did best: investigate. He opened his laptop and typed Aura Designer Atelier location into the search bar. The results were, as expected, fruitless. Message boards were filled with speculation, but there was no concrete information. The brand's digital footprint was a masterclass in controlled anonymity. Frustrated, he called a man he knew named Patrick, a private investigator he occasionally used for discreet corporate due diligence. Patrick was expensive, but he was good. Patrick, Arthur said, his voice clipped. "I have a small personal project for you. It's time sensitive." "Name it," came the gruff reply. "A fashion brand. Aura. I want to know who is behind it. I want a name, an address, a history, everything. Aura." Patrick sounded surprised. "That's a tough one, Mr. Penhaligon. They're famously airtight." "Everyone has a weakness," Arthur snapped. "Follow the money. The corporate filings. The agent they use. The car service they hired today. I want an answer by the end of the day." "It'll cost you," Patrick warned. "Just get it done," Arthur said, and hung up. Meanwhile, Bethany's car was weaving its way out of the familiar territory of Midtown and into a neighborhood she rarely, if ever, ventured into. The skyscrapers gave way to older, more uniform buildings of brick and stone. The storefronts changed from global luxury brands to independent bookstores and small artisanal shops. The car finally stopped in front of an unassuming grey stone building with a discreet black-painted door. There was no sign, no plaque. A woman in a simple, elegant black dress was waiting. "Miss Cole," she asked politely. "This way, please." Bethany was led through the door and up 3 flights of stairs. The air grew quieter with each step. The woman opened a final door and gestured for Bethany to enter. "Aura will be with you shortly." Bethany stepped inside and the door closed softly behind her, leaving her alone. The room was breathtaking. It was not the opulent velvet-draped salon she had imagined. It was a working studio, vast, airy, and filled with light. Bolts of fabric were stacked like a library of textures. Sketches were pinned to a wall. Mannequins stood in thoughtful poses. The room smelled of clean linen charcoal and something floral like jasmine tea. It felt sacred. She wandered deeper into the room, running her hand over a bolt of heavy silk. The quality was undeniable. She saw a dress in progress on one of the mannequins, a column of deep emerald green, its seams pinned with surgical precision. This was a place of serious work. "Miss Cole, thank you for coming." The voice was quiet, calm, and came from behind her. Bethany turned. Standing there was a woman. She was dressed simply in tailored black trousers and a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was intelligent and serene. She looked familiar, but Bethany couldn't place her. There was an air of quiet authority about her, but she wasn't what Bethany had expected at all. She had pictured some flamboyant, eccentric artist. This woman was composed. "You're Aura," Bethany asked, a little thrown. "I am the designer behind Aura," the woman said with a small, polite smile. She did not offer her name. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you some tea?" They sat in two simple but elegant armchairs near the large windows. The woman Aura poured tea into delicate ceramic cups. She moved with an unhurried grace that Bethany found both calming and slightly intimidating. "Your celestial magic gown was a pleasure to create." Aura began, her voice smooth and even. The beadwork was inspired by the hoarfrost on winter branches. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," Bethany said, meaning it sincerely. Everyone was captivated by it. "Good design shouldn't captivate," Aura corrected gently. "It should liberate. It should feel like the purest version of yourself." She looked at Bethany with discerning eyes. "Tell me about the wedding, not the venue or the guest list. Tell me how you want to feel on that day." The question caught Bethany off guard. No other designer had ever asked her that. They asked about silhouettes, necklines, fabrics. They asked about trends. Arthur had told her to talk about status, about making a statement. But this quiet, intense woman was asking about her feelings. For the next hour they talked, or rather Bethany talked. Prodded by Aura's insightful, gentle questions, she found herself speaking not just about the wedding, but about her life. She spoke of the pressure of being a Cole, the constant expectation to be perfect, to be dazzling. She admitted that sometimes the galas and the parties felt like a performance, and that she wasn't always sure who she was when the costume came off. She had never spoken this way to anyone, least of all to Arthur. The designer listened patiently, her grey eyes watchful and intelligent. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were perceptive, cutting through the noise to the heart of the matter. "It seems to me," Aura said finally, as the light outside began to fade, "that you are caught between wanting to be a monument and wanting to be a woman. The world expects you to be a monument. Your dress should allow you to be a woman." Bethany stared at her, mesmerized. "Yes," she whispered. "That's it. That's exactly it." As she was leaving, feeling lighter and more understood than she had in years, a thought struck her. The designer's face was still naggingly familiar. "Have we met before?" Bethany asked at the door. Aura's calm expression didn't waver. "I'm not a very social person. I doubt our paths would have crossed." The answer was smooth, definitive. Bethany let it go. Back in the penthouse, Arthur was pacing like a caged tiger. His phone finally rang. It was Patrick. "You're not going to believe this," the investigator said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "Aura is registered as a sole proprietorship. I had to pull property deeds and utility records for the atelier address the car service dropped at. The owner of the brand, the sole designer, the woman who owns that studio, her name is Evelyn Reed." Arthur froze. The world tilted on its axis. "What did you say, Evelyn Reed? As in your ex-wife?" Arthur sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. "Evelyn, Evelyn Dreary, simple, practical Evelyn. The woman he had mocked, pitied, and discarded. It was impossible. It was a joke, a mistake. But as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed, he knew it was true. Her hobby, her quiet nature, her strange, placid reaction at the gala. Her comment, "Practicality has its merits. It lasts." And the dress, the celeste gown, his symbol of triumph, of trading up. He had paid his ex-wife, the woman he considered a failure, a small fortune to make his new fiancée look like a queen. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. Just then, the door opened. Bethany swept in, her face glowing. "Arthur." It was incredible. "She's a genius, an absolute genius. You should have heard the things she said. She gets it. She gets me," she gushed. Arthur looked at her, at the woman he was pinning all his hopes on, and all he could see was the ghost of his wife. He had sent Bethany into the lion's den, and she had come back calling the lion a visionary. "She's going to design the dress," Bethany announced, beaming. "And Arthur, I think it's going to be the most beautiful dress in the world." Arthur couldn't speak. He just stared, his mind a maelstrom of rage, shock, and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. The weeks leading up to the Metropolitan Fashion Vanguard Awards were a blur of activity for everyone involved, though for vastly different reasons. For Evelyn, it was a period of intense, focused creation. After her meeting with Bethany, she had designed a wedding dress that was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. It was not the monumental, attention-grabbing gown Bethany thought she wanted. Instead, it was a study in vulnerability and strength, made of a heavy liquid silk crepe that moved like water. It had long, clean lines, a dramatic sweeping back, and sleeves so delicately embroidered with tiny seed pearl blossoms that they seemed to have grown there. It was a dress for a woman, not an heiress. Bethany had wept when she saw the sketches. But beyond the wedding dress, bigger news was brewing. Genevieve Dubois, having championed Aura from the beginning, had used her considerable influence. Aura was to be presented with the Emerging Designer of the Year award at the upcoming Vanguard ceremony, the most prestigious event on the fashion calendar. The one condition of accepting the award was that the designer behind Aura would finally have to reveal their identity. Finn had argued for it passionately. "This is it, Ev. This is the moment. You can't stay a ghost forever. You've built the foundation. The work speaks for itself. Now it's time to claim it. It's time for Evelyn Reed to take a bow." Evelyn, after much soul-searching, agreed. It was time. Her anonymity had served its purpose. It had protected her, allowed her to build her business on merit alone. Now, stepping into the light felt less like a risk and more like a final necessary step in her own liberation. For Arthur, those same weeks were a private hell. The knowledge that Evelyn was Aura festered inside him like a poison. Every excited mention of the brand from Bethany, every gushing compliment about the mysterious designer's genius was a fresh twist of the knife. He was trapped in a farce of his own making. His fiancée was idolizing his ex-wife, and he was footing the bill. His financial situation had also worsened. The energy stock had collapsed, wiping out a significant portion of his capital. He was now more dependent than ever on his marriage to Bethany. He couldn't afford to rock the boat. He couldn't expose Evelyn without exposing his own foolishness, without destroying Bethany's happiness, and with it his own financial salvation. So he said nothing. He smiled, he nodded, he played the part of the proud, supportive fiancé, while inside he was consumed by a helpless rage. He tried to subtly poison the well. "Are you sure about the dress, darling?" he'd ask. "It seems a bit simple in the sketches." "It's not simple. Arthur, it's sublime." Bethany would counter completely under Evelyn's spell. "Aura says that true elegance is quiet." The words were Evelyn's, and hearing them from Bethany's lips was a unique form of torture. The night of the Vanguard Awards arrived. It was the social apex of the season, held at the Museum of Modern Art. The red carpet was a river of flashbulbs and couture. Arthur stood stiffly beside Bethany, his smile a tight, painful rictus. Bethany was a vision. She was wearing another custom aura creation for the event, a gown of shimmering pewter-colored silk, elegant and striking. She was once again the center of attention. "Isn't it thrilling?" she whispered to him as they took their seats in the grand auditorium. "They say Aura is going to be revealed tonight when she accepts her award. We'll finally get to see her." Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. He knew what was coming. He could have warned Bethany, could have saved her the public shock. But a dark, selfish part of him wanted her to feel the same humiliation he felt. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. The ceremony began. Awards were presented, speeches were made. Finally, Genevieve Dubois took the stage to present the award for Emerging Designer of the Year. The room fell silent. There are moments in fashion. Genevieve began, her voice resonating through the auditorium, when a new voice emerges that is so clear, so confident, and so utterly original that it changes the conversation. This year, that voice belongs to Aura. A montage of Aura's designs flashed on the giant screens. The actress at the airport, the French heiress, and finally, a stunning editorial shot of the Celeste gown. Bethany gasped and squeezed Arthur's arm. "That's my dress." "Aura has reminded us," Genevieve continued, "that craftsmanship is not old-fashioned, that silence can be more powerful than noise, and that a garment's true value lies not in its label, but in its soul." The designer built this brand from the ground up on her own terms, letting the work speak for itself. She is a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of artistry in a world obsessed with fame. Arthur felt his collar grow tight. Genevieve was telling Evelyn's story, his story, but from a very different perspective. "It is my profound honor to announce that the winner of the 2025 Emerging Designer of the Year award is Aura, and the incredible woman behind it, Ms. Evelyn Reed." The name hung in the air for a moment. There was a smattering of confused applause. Evelyn Reed. The name was unfamiliar to most. And then, from a side aisle, Evelyn emerged. She was wearing a simple, exquisitely cut black jumpsuit of her own design. Her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked poised, confident, and serene. She looked nothing like the drab, defeated woman Arthur had painted in his memory. She looked like a creator, a powerhouse. The camera projecting her image onto the screens panned for reactions in the audience. It found Bethany Cole. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the screen to the stage, and then to the man beside her face a mask of confusion. And then, the camera found Arthur. His face was pale, his expression frozen in a silent scream of utter abject horror. The two shots, the shocked fiancé and the humiliated ex-husband, were broadcast for the entire fashion world to see. Bethany turned to him, her eyes flashing with a million questions. But before she could speak, Evelyn reached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, her calm, grey eyes sweeping over the room until for a brief, searing moment they met Arthur's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no malice. There was only a quiet finality. She leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Genevieve and the Vanguard Committee. They say to build something new, you first have to tear down the old. I'd like to thank my ex-husband, Arthur Penhaligon. He taught me through his own actions the profound importance of self-worth. He was the one who first showed me that judging a woman by the simplicity of her clothes is a fool's game. Because you never know. She might have designed the dress your fiancé is wearing." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. It was a perfectly delivered, devastatingly elegant coup de grace. Every eye in the room swiveled from Evelyn on the stage to Arthur and Bethany. Bethany looked down at her pewter gown as if it had caught fire. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. She stared at Arthur not with confusion anymore, but with the cold, hard light of dawning comprehension and utter betrayal. Arthur didn't see her look. He was just staring at the stage, at the woman he had so casually discarded. She hadn't just built an empire from the ashes of their marriage. She had used his own arrogance as the blueprint. And she had just unveiled her masterpiece on the biggest stage in the world, leaving him buried in the rubble. The aftermath of the Vanguard Awards was a nuclear winter for Arthur Penhaligon. The story was simply too juicy to be ignored. It had everything: a scorned wife's triumphant return, a clueless heiress, and a pompous, arrogant husband receiving his public comeuppance. The gossip columns and fashion blogs feasted on it for weeks. They called it the Aura Affair and the Penhaligon Predicament. Photos of Arthur's horrified face and Bethany's shocked expression were juxtaposed with images of Evelyn's serene, powerful acceptance speech. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, glacial affair. Bethany sat on the far side of the limousine, her arms crossed, her aura gown, looking like a cruel joke. Arthur tried to speak, to formulate a defense, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? I'm sorry I mocked my ex-wife while secretly making you her biggest patron. I'm sorry, I'm a fool. When they arrived, Bethany didn't even look at him. She walked straight to the guest bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, her father, a formidable man, with cold, calculating eyes, arrived with two of his lawyers. The meeting was short and brutal. The engagement was off. All financial ties between the Coles and Arthur were severed. Mr. Cole made it icily clear that Arthur's name was now poison in their world. The wedding, the merger, the financial safety net, it all vanished in an instant, left alone in the sterile white penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum. Arthur's world fully collapsed. The loss of the Cole fortune meant his creditors, who had been patient in anticipation of his marriage, came calling. The leveraged bets on the energy stock became an anchor, pulling him down into a sea of debt. Within 3 months, he was forced to sell the penthouse, his car, and his collection of expensive watches. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by off-the-rack replacements. The Titan of finance was reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at the same parties he used to command. He saw Evelyn one last time months later. It was a chance encounter on a busy street. He was rushing to a job interview for a mid-level analyst position. She was stepping out of a black car, looking effortlessly chic in a camel-colored aura coat on her way into a building that probably housed her new expanded headquarters. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. He saw no pity, no gloating. He saw nothing at all. To her, he was just a man in a crowd, a ghost from a past she had long since moved beyond. That indifference was more painful than any hatred could ever be. Evelyn's world, in contrast, was dawning. Revealing her identity had been like throwing gasoline on the fire of her success. Aura, now attached to the compelling story of Evelyn Reed, became the most sought-after brand in the world. Investors lined up, but she chose her partners carefully, retaining full creative control. She opened a flagship store in Soho, a minimalist temple to her design philosophy. She accepted the commission from the European princess. Her brand became synonymous with intelligent, empowered luxury. She never spoke of Arthur publicly again. Her speech at the awards had been the first and last word on the matter. It wasn't a story she needed to tell. It was a foundation she had built upon. One evening, months after the awards, she was in her new larger studio working late. The space was beautiful, overlooking the city lights. Finn came in with 2 cups of tea, a ritual that had remained unchanged. The final numbers for the quarter are in, he said, setting a cup on her desk. We've exceeded our projections by 200%. That's good, Evelyn said, smiling, but her eyes were on a sketch in front of her. Just good, Finn teased, leaning against the desk. Ev, we're building an empire. She looked up at him, her grey eyes clear and bright. We're building beautiful things, Finn. That's what matters. She took a sip of her tea. The empire is just a happy consequence. He watched her for a moment, the woman he had seen at her lowest, now so firmly at her highest. Her success wasn't a revenge story, he realized. Revenge is a hot, messy, finite emotion. This was different. This was a story of creation. She hadn't focused on destroying Arthur's world. She had been too busy building her own. His collapse was merely a side effect of her rise, a shadow cast by her growing light. Evelyn looked out the vast window at the glittering cityscape. She had once felt so small in this city, invisible beside a man who demanded all the light for himself. Now she knew the truth. The brightest light doesn't need to be demanded. It simply needs to be created. And from now on, she would be the one to create it. And so Arthur Penhaligon became a footnote in Evelyn Reed's incredible story. He learnt the hard way that a person's worth is not defined by the label on their clothes, but by the substance of their character and the strength of their spirit. Evelyn's triumph wasn't just in her success, but in her refusal to become like the man who wronged her. She found her power not in public revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable excellence of her work. Her story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most extraordinary things to show the world. What did you think of Evelyn's ultimate comeback? Was it a perfect act of poetic justice, or would you have wanted a more direct confrontation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. If this story of quiet triumph and self-made success resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a story of true empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another real-life drama that will leave you thinking long after it's over. Thank you for listening.